At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
It's indeed a special day for Hind Ke Jawahar. Today we have a very special guest, Professor Sugata Bose, noted historian. Today we will talk about two great personalities, sir, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and his complex relationship with Jawaharlal Nehru. Welcome to Hind Ke Jawahar.
It's good to be part of Hind Ke Jawahar.
My first question to you is, sir, today we will be discussing about the complicated relationship that Jawaharlal Nehru shared with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. So, sir, if we look at the history, their relationships evolved in from 1920s to 1930s till 1940s. So, if we look particularly at the period of 1920, both were the two young leaders of the Congress. What you have to tell about those at that point of time?
The relationship between Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose is a quite fascinating one. There was, of course, an age difference. Nehru was born in 1889 and Bose in 1897. Subhash Chandra Bose's discovery of India occurred much earlier in life than Jawaharlal Nehru's. Subhash read Vivekananda's works in 1912 as a 15-year-old and decided that he would devote his entire life to the service of humanity, which of course included service of the country. Jawaharlal Nehru, of course, spent his student years in England, and it was in 1921, when he was in North India, that he discovered India. There's a beautiful chapter in his autobiography titled Among the Kisans. That is a difference in getting to know India, the India that was marred in poverty and illiteracy and disease, that occurred at rather different points of time for Subhash and Jawaharlal. However, it was from 1921 that they came together in India's freedom struggle. Nehru, of course, was a keen participant, particularly in Uttar Pradesh, of the non-cooperation movement led by Mahatma Gandhi. And it was in that year that Subhash Chandra Bose resigned from the Indian civil service and plunged into the Indian freedom struggle. Subhash came back and met Mahatma Gandhi in Bombay in July of 1921, and then moved to Calcutta, where under the leadership of Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das, he took part in the non-violent non-cooperation movement. Now, throughout the 1920s, they worked closely. Both became leaders of the youth and students. Now, of course, there was a long period when Subhash Chandra Bose was in prison, from October 1924 to May of 1927. And much of that time was spent in Burmese prisons. But it was after Subhash's release in mid-1927 that in late 1927, 1928, 1929, Subhash and Jawaharlal worked very closely together. They were espousing the cause of the peasants and the workers, the students and the youth. And they, of course, wanted Purna Swaraj, complete independence. And it was Subhash Chandra Bose who moved a resolution at the Calcutta Congress in December 1928, trying to amend the Motilal Nehru report's goal of dominion status and replacing it with complete independence. That amendment by Subhash was defeated after Gandhiji's intervention in Calcutta. But of course, Gandhiji had said that he would become an independence wala if dominion status did not come within a year. So it was in Lahore that the Purna Swaraj resolution was passed. And what Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose wanted came to be adopted as the goal of the Indian National Congress.
Sir, during at that point of time, we see that Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose forms Independence for India League also. and they were also very close to the revolutionaries of that time. What were the reasons that revolutionaries were attracted to both these men? Can you say?
Subhash Chandra Bose, of course, was very close to Bengal's revolutionaries throughout the 1920s and the early 1930s. There was, of course, Bhagat Singh and his comrades in Punjab and northern India in the late 1920s. But even here in Bengal, Binoy Badal Dinesh stormed the Writers' Building in December 1930. Even before that, in April of 1930, there was the Chittagong Armory raid. And so in 1931, after Bhagat Singh, Rajguru and Sukhdev were executed, the Karachi Congress, a year after the Lahore Congress, met under the shadow of that great tragedy. And Nehru, of course, writes in his autobiography that Bhagat Singh became a folk hero. And Subhash Chandra Bose was also very deeply committed to the ideals that were espoused by the Naujawan Bharat Sabha. And in many ways, he felt more comfortable in the company of these young idealistic revolutionaries than with the rather more staid freedom fighters who were taking part in civil disobedience as part of the Indian National Congress. So in some ways, these were young leaders who held an appeal to the youth, who were rather more impatient than the more elderly leaders of the Indian National Congress in moving towards full independence.
So both went to see Bhagat Singh in jail. We can say also that also. So you were talking about the Karachi Congress in particular. That Congress session is a very interesting session of fundamental rights resolution was passed. We see that Nehru and Subhash were architects in drafting that fundamental right resolution. Mahatma Gandhi moved it. Sardar Patel was the president of the Congress session. Can you emphasize on those aspects of the national movement? What were the fundamental right resolution? How important it is now in contemporary times?
Yes, it's extremely important to recognize that the Indian National Congress, led by Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose, wanted to think in terms of the future. What would be the basic rights of equal citizenship once independence was won? And Subhash Chandra Bose, of course, was extremely sort of far-sighted, and we will see how in the late 1930s he formed the National Planning Committee as president of the Indian National Congress in 1938, of which he made Jawaharlal Nehru the chairman. But we can see that even in the early 1930s, there was a commitment to the fundamental rights of Indians who were at that stage colonial subjects, but who must be prepared for full and equal citizenship. Now, this was a period of the civil disobedience movement, which lasted in two phases from 1930 to 1934. And unfortunately, as happens in any subject country, both Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose were in prison for much of that period. And Subhash Chandra Bose was released on health grounds only in late February 1933. And he wasn't even released until he was taken to the harbor in Bombay and put on a ship to be sent into European exile. And I would say that perhaps even more important than what Nehru and Bose did together in the early 1930s in India when they were free and out of prison was how they came together in Europe. Subhash Chandra Bose was in European exile from 1933 to 1936. Jawaharlal Nehru was in prison in 1934, 1935. And what we find is that in 1935, it is Subhash Chandra Bose who is accompanying Kamala Nehru on a train journey from Vienna up to Prague. Kamala Nehru, of course, was suffering from pulmonary tuberculosis. Nehru was in jail in India. And then eventually, Nehru was released and he came to Europe. And what we find is that Subhash Chandra Bose is visiting the Nehrus in Badenweiler, and both of them are staying in the same boarding house. And they are very close at that point. And of course, Subhash Chandra Bose was setting up associations in practically every European capital to make sure that there was support abroad for the cause of India's freedom. And he was organizing Indian students who were studying in Europe. So both Bose and Nehru had an active interest in international affairs, and they both believed that there has to be support garnered for the cause of India's freedom abroad. And after Subhash Chandra Bose's visit to Ireland and France in February of 1936, the two of them met again, and this time in Lausanne, where Kamala Nehru was very ill, and eventually she passed away on the 28th of February of 1936. Subhash Chandra was present during this tragedy, the personal tragedy for Jawaharlal Nehru. Indira was also there, and Subhash Chandra Bose in fact helped in making some of the funeral arrangements. And it's only after that he went to Hofgastein in Austria and wrote a beautiful letter to his friend Jawaharlal, saying that he is always at Jawaharlal's service at this poignant moment in Nehru's life.
So we find that it was at this point of time that their relationship strengthened, and we see a couple of letters where they are exchanging books also. We can talk about those personal aspects also. Sir, but we want to shift towards some of the reflections Nehru has on socialism at that point of time, and also Subhash Chandra Bose at this European tour. So can you emphasize on the influence of socialism on both these remarkable men?
Both Nehru and Bose wanted to learn from socialistic experiments in Europe at that time, but both believed that socialism had to be adapted to Indian conditions. Subhash Chandra Bose preferred to use the Desi word, Samyavada, to articulate his philosophy of equality and harmony. And in some ways, I would say that Jawaharlal Nehru was probably more impressed by the Soviet Union than was Subhash Chandra Bose. We find that Bose, in his book, The Indian Struggle, had some criticisms of Soviet communism. And in fact, he was not given a visa to visit the Soviet Union. Instead, he went to Ireland and other countries of Europe. But they were both left-leaning. They believed in egalitarianism. They wanted to mobilize the subordinated classes, the peasants and the workers in India's freedom struggle. And both, I think, had a commitment to gender equality as well. Not communism, but socialism adapted to the Indian situation was what both of them believed in, even though there were some variations in their thought.
Sir, Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, he believed that there were two modernists in the Congress. One is Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. You yourself has been a student of Tagore. Can you emphasize why Gurudev felt like that? What were the reasons for it?
Rabindranath Tagore took very active interest in the Indian National Congress and its future in the late 1930s. Let me step back a little. Jawaharlal Nehru came back to India in 1936, just in time for the Lucknow Congress. Subhash Chandra Bose also came back in late March of 1936, but unfortunately Subhash Chandra Bose was imprisoned straight away, and he was not released until after the provincial elections of 1937. And then I have to also point out that Subhash Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru worked very closely together at the time of the All India Congress Committee's meeting in Calcutta in October and November of 1937. At that time, both of them consulted Rabindranath Tagore on a very sensitive subject, and that was the song Bande Mataram. And it was on Rabindranath's advice that the Indian National Congress decided at this AICC meeting that from now on, at national meetings, only the first part of the song, which is a beautiful evocation of the natural splendor of our country, would be performed. And that was because, Tagore felt that we needed unity and good sense in our nationalist movement. He did not want a rivalry between different religious communities. And so already from that point onwards, they were coming close together. And then Mahatma Gandhi decided that Subhash Chandra Bose would be the president of the Indian National Congress. He would be Jawaharlal Nehru's successor in 1938. And so that year, there was a coming together of the different strands of the Indian National Congress. And it's very interesting to see that Subhash Chandra Bose actually postponed the formal inauguration of the National Planning Committee until Jawaharlal Nehru returned from Europe, because he felt that if the National Planning Committee was to be successful, then Jawaharlal Nehru had to be its chairman. And that's what he wrote to Nehru. Now, Tagore became very fascinated with this idea of the National Planning Committee because the scientist Meghnad Shah talked to him about it. And so when the time came at the end of 1938, the beginning of 1939, to decide who should be the president of the Indian National Congress in 1939, Rabindranath Tagore suggested that Subhash Chandra Bose should be the Congress president again. That was the message that he sent both to Gandhi and Nehru, because he said Nehru and Bose are the only two modernists in the Congress. They have a vision for the future, and Nehru's participation was already assured as chairman of the National Planning Committee. So for another year, the modernist Subhash Chandra Bose should be the president.
Sir, we also find a letter written by Subhash Chandra Bose 2 years before that, what you were talking about. He says that among the front rank of leaders, only you are the one who can lead the Congress in a progressive direction. Why do you think that Subhash Chandra Bose thought this about Jawaharlal Nehru?
Yes, this he wrote just before Nehru was returning
and becoming Congress president.
And becoming the Congress president, and he was going to preside over the Lucknow session. And in addition to saying what you've just quoted from the letter, Subhash Chandra Bose said something else which was very interesting.
Position is unique, I think.
That Nehru's position was unique because Gandhiji will not go against Nehru. And so Subhash Chandra Bose said to Jawaharlal, who was like an elder brother to him, that you must not think that your position is weaker than it actually is, that you can assert yourself. And that's why he felt that Nehru's position was unique in leading the Congress in a more progressive direction.
In Indian struggle, he talks about it that Jawaharlal Nehru's mind is revolutionary, but the heart is Gandhian.
Yes,
So,
the head pulls in one direction, the heart remains with Gandhi. And that, I think, was, again, a difference between Jawaharlal and Subhash. Jawaharlal would often disagree with Gandhiji, but then ultimately fall in line, while Subhash Chandra Bose had the highest respect for Mahatma Gandhi, but was not as mesmerized as Nehru was, and would actually take a stand and differ if need be.
rightly called as the rebellious son.
That's right.
So now we find that the differences starts to rise between the two stalwarts. What were the reasons of those differences? Was it because of some international politics also developing at that point of time? Can you, sir, please emphasize?
At first, it was not so much about international politics. I mean, both were interested in international affairs, of course, in a way that other leaders of the Indian National Congress were not. I think what happened was that in 1939, Subhash Chandra Bose stood for re-election, and he won, defeating the candidate favored by Mahatma Gandhi, Pattabhi Sitaramaiah. And for the first time in 20 years, Gandhi's authority within the Indian National Congress had been successfully challenged. And Subhash Chandra Bose, of course, wanted Gandhiji's support, and he tried to say to Mahatma Gandhi that we have no differences. It's only those who claim to be Gandhians who are opposing me. And he wanted to gain the trust of
The greatest man.
India's greatest man. But unfortunately, at the Tripuri Congress, the Gandhian right wing was able to pass a resolution, the Pant resolution moved by Govind Vallabh Pant, and which required Subhash Chandra Bose to form the Congress Working Committee in consultation with Mahatma Gandhi, but also have a committee which enjoyed Gandhiji's implicit trust. And Gandhiji did not cooperate after the passage of that resolution. I think that Subhash Chandra Bose felt let down by Jawaharlal Nehru, that even though Nehru did not side fully with the Gandhian right wing during this crisis in the top echelons of the Indian National Congress in March, April 1939, he did not fully side with Subhash Chandra Bose and the leftists. And so Subhash Chandra Bose wrote him a long letter which went into 27 typed pages, in which he said that Nehru was riding two horses. So it is this feeling of having been let down by his elder brother and friend, which I think contributed to a parting of the ways at that point, even though I have to say that after this letter was sent to Nehru, Nehru replied and said that perhaps we have temperamental differences, but that did not prevent him from coming to see Subhash Chandra Bose again. And they tried in April to see whether some kind of a settlement could be worked out with Mahatma Gandhi. But that was not possible, and therefore ultimately Subhash Chandra Bose resigned as President of the Congress on the 29th of April 1939. So I think it was more a case of Subhash Chandra Bose feeling that Jawaharlal Nehru should have sided with the socialists within the Indian National Congress at that stage and not tried to find a middle ground. But after that, of course, international politics did play a role. Subhash Chandra Bose believed that it was imperative to take advantage of an international war crisis to strike for India's freedom. Nehru's position was more ideologically driven, a stand against fascism and so forth. And therefore, it was a question of Subhash Chandra Bose wanting an uncompromising battle against British imperialism, and in order to reach Indian soldiers who were imprisoned by the enemies of Britain after the Second World War broke out. Subhash Chandra Bose had been part of this Gandhian movement for 20 years. He had seen that the civilian masses had all rallied to the Indian National Congress and to the non-cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement. He wanted Gandhiji to launch another mass movement in 1939. Gandhiji had said that the country was not yet prepared for such a movement. But he felt once the war broke out, the one element who had not joined the Indian freedom struggle, the soldiers who were fighting for the King Emperor, had to be reached. And he felt that he had to instill in them new loyalty to the cause of India's freedom. So that was when the paths diverged in their assessment of what needed to be done during the Second World War.
Sir, interestingly, you used the phrase the elder brother. Jawaharlal Nehru was born in 1889, and Subhash Chandra Bose's much dear elder brother Sarat Chandra Bose was also born in 1889. So we see that they had differences like two brothers may have on political scenarios. Are those differences relevant in today's context, or this vision for the India which they espoused from the 1920s to their deaths, they are much of the relevant for us?
Today, I think that the similarities are much more relevant than the differences. Of course, as academics, as historians, we must not gloss over the differences, but fundamentally, I think that both believed in a progressive politics, and that Indian version of socialism that they espoused continues to be relevant in India today. And they both believed in equal rights and equal respect for all religious communities, all linguistic groups, all genders. And I think that is the fundamental similarity which ought to be emphasized today. You mentioned Sharat Chandra Bose. I think it's very important also to recognize that being of the same age, Sharat Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru were also very close in the 1930s. When Subhash Chandra Bose was in prison, it was Sharat Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru who were campaigning together at the time of the 1937 elections. It was in Sharat Chandra Bose's Woodburn Park home that Nehru came and stayed whenever he visited Kolkata in the 1930s. So that closeness also needs to be remembered. Now, they too had their differences in 1947 because Sharat Chandra Bose was uncompromisingly opposed to the partition along religious lines and felt that the Congress should not have acquiesced in the partition of Punjab and Bengal. And Sharat Bose tried until the very last to preserve the unity of Bengal. But that should not make us forget how throughout the late 1930s there was a very deep sort of closeness between Sharat Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru as well.
Sir, now we find that Subhash Chandra Bose goes abroad, forms INA. He names the brigade after Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru and Maulana Azad. 2-3 years before that, he was having disagreements with those. What reflects that about Netaji and also his relationship with the Congress leaders?
Subhash Chandra Bose wanted to forge unity among not just Hindus and Muslims, Punjabis and Tamils, men and women on the basis of equality, but he really wanted to forge unity between those who were fighting for freedom inside India and those whom he was mobilizing to fight for India's freedom outside India. And once Mahatma Gandhi had launched the Quit India movement in 1942, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and Mahatma Gandhi had come really very close together in their aims and ideology. And that is why, we are sitting here at Netaji Bhavan, 38 by 2 Elgin Road, from where Netaji escaped. My father, Shishir Kumar Bose, drove the car in which he traveled from Calcutta to Gomo. And then if you look at Subhash Chandra Bose's main companions as he journeyed eventually to Southeast Asia, it was Mian Akbar Shah who received him in Peshawar. It was Abid Hassan who was his sole Indian companion on his 3-month submarine voyage from Europe to Asia. So even there you can see how he was trying to make sure that all of India's religious communities would be part of the movement. And in this he succeeded remarkably from July of 1943 onwards, once he became the Supreme Commander of the Indian National Army. No one had succeeded in uniting Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians in the way that he had in this period. And he wanted to make sure that common cause was made with the Indian National Congress. These were leaders who had been imprisoned after the beginning of the Quit India struggle. And so he made sure that when the first division of the Indian National Army was formed, it was commanded by Muhammad Zaman Kiani. 3 of its brigades would be named Gandhi Brigade, Nehru Brigade, and Azad Brigade. And the soldiers of the Azad Hind Fauj decided to name a 4th brigade after him, the Subhash Brigade. Now it was the Gandhi Brigade, led by Inayat Kiani, which fought bravely in Imphal. And it was the Nehru Brigade, which fought very bravely in the rearguard actions in Burma. In fact, Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon presented a paper once here at the Netaji Research Bureau, which was titled Nehru Holds the Irrawaddy, the way in which the Nehru Brigade of the Indian National Army was able to hold up and delay the crossing of the British forces across the Irrawaddy River in Burma. And then, of course, despite the military setback in Imphal and Kohima, the Indian National Army of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose won a remarkable political victory in India. Once the British decided to put on trial 3 officers of the Indian National Army, Prem Kumar Saigal, Shahnawaz Khan, and Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon. And at that stage, Jawaharlal Nehru put on his barrister's gown for the first time in a quarter of a century and joined Tej Bahadur Sapru and Bhola Bhai Desai as part of the defense team at the Red Fort trial. And he played a significant role in spreading the news of the great saga of the Indian National Army across the length and breadth of the country. Of course, Bhola Bhai Desai was absolutely brilliant as a defense lawyer. And the whole country was aroused. And as Mahatma Gandhi put it, even the regular forces were now imbued with the spirit of freedom. And what Mahatma Gandhi noted was the most significant contribution of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was the unity that he had successfully forged among all of the religious communities of India. So, Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of non-violence, met Netaji's soldiers of the Indian National Army. And there is a beautiful description of how Gandhi went to see them in the Kabul lines and the Red Fort. And they complained to Gandhiji that, we were completely united under Netaji's leadership. And here the British are offering us separately Hindu tea and Muslim tea. And Gandhiji said, why do you suffer it? And they replied, we don't. We mix Hindu tea and Muslim tea equally and then serve. And the same with food. And Mahatma Gandhi laughed and approved. And this is very significant because earlier on, the early Gandhi did not believe in interdining or intermarriage.
1920.
But in the 1920s, but the late Mahatma Gandhi had been in some ways won over by his rebellious son, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and had become a supporter of interdining and intermarriage among different religious communities. And there's one other point that I wish to make, which is quite poignant. And Nehru, of course, went to Singapore after the war ended. And, of course, it is often said that he was rather unduly influenced by Mountbatten, Louis Mountbatten, as well as Edwina Mountbatten. And that may well have been the case in a certain respect. But even though Mountbatten didn't really want him to go and visit the INA Memorial, which had been blown up on the 6th of September of 1945 on Mountbatten's orders, Nehru did go. And I had conversations with Singapore's former president, S.R. Nathan, who gave me a description of Nehru's visit. And also, someone in Singapore gave him a broken piece of the INA Memorial, and the part which actually had Subhash CH written on it, which he presented to Cyril John Stracey, the Anglo-Indian officer of the INA who had been entrusted by Netaji to build this INA Memorial in record time with their motto, Ittifaq, Etmad, Qurbani, unity, faith, sacrifice emblazoned upon it. And apparently Nehru was very moved when he went to visit the site of this INA Memorial in Singapore. So he took part in the defense of the INA soldiers and also in his own way paid tribute to the martyrs of that freedom struggle.
Sir, you took the name and Shahnawaz Khan. They were all from three different faiths.
And I also mentioned Cyril John Stracey,
Yes.
who was a Christian.
Of course, sir. So we see that in today's context, Nehru's India or Bose's India versus the India which we are witnessing today, how different you see?
It's a huge contrast. What we see today is religious majoritarianism rampant. And what the INA represented was equality and unity among followers of all the different religious faiths of India. And I talked about Imphal, and who raised the Indian tricolour with the charkha in the middle in Moirang, close to Imphal, in April 1944. It was Shaukat Malik. All of the names of Netaji's soldiers I've mentioned, they belong to all of the different religious faiths of India. And that is why I think we need to rekindle that spirit of Netaji's Indian National Army to make sure that we can put the struggle for equal citizenship in India again on a very firm footing. There is a lot to learn from that, the history of that period.
Sir, unfortunately on 18th August 1945, Subhash Bose passes away. Lots of debates have in recent years have risen on those topics that it was actually Nehru who conspired against Subhash Bose. All this nonsense we see lots on WhatsApps and also on social media. What do you have to say about that?
Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was the only top-ranking leader of the Indian independence movement who laid down his life on the battlefield fighting for India's freedom. He was trying to move from one battlefield to another in a Japanese bomber when he met his mortal end. And I've described his death as the mortal end of a deathless hero. He's immortal in a much deeper sense. And we need to honor his supreme self-sacrifice. And we must just do away with all of the very lowly conspiracy theories that do the rounds. In fact, the one committee which actually was able to take the evidence of eyewitnesses to that tragedy was the Shahnawaz Committee that had been appointed by Jawaharlal Nehru in 1956. And this was in 1956. And they came to the correct conclusion. And so I would say that let us, of course, focus on the life and work and the ideals of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. But I think the younger generation of Indians are mature enough to come to terms with the mortal end of a deathless hero.
August 15, 1947, India becomes independence. On 16th of August, Jawaharlal Nehru from the ramparts of Red Fort, he invokes Netaji. He talks about him in length. And we see from 47 to 64, there are many instances when Nehru remembers Netaji very fondly. But today, some people are trying to create a difference among those individuals. That Nehru had forgotten Netaji from 47 to 64 as a prime minister. What do you want to say about that?
Well, Nehru in his first address from the ramparts of the Red Fort, which took place a day after Independence Day on the 16th of August of 1947, mentioned only two individuals by name. He paid his tribute to all freedom fighters, but the only two individuals that he mentioned by name were Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And he actually said that this should have been Subhash's day, and that he had raised the flag of independence abroad. In fact, he had even raised it inside India on the Andaman Islands, and in, of course, in northeast India, the Azad Hind Fauj had raised the Indian tricolour. So he acknowledged the contribution of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And unfortunately, of course, I think that there was some degree of post-colonial continuity after 1947, and there were things that were done by members of the government of post-independence India which should never have been done. For example, continued surveillance on those who were not just family members of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, but who had been participants in the freedom struggle under Netaji's leadership. But I think at the level of Jawaharlal Nehru and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, there was always respect. Of course, we lost Netaji in 1945. So one of the big ifs of history that remains with us, that had they been able to work together, could India have moved faster towards a more sort of progressive direction? But Nehru, of course, was Prime Minister for 17 years, and therefore he has to be given both the credit for the achievements of that period and some of the blame for the failures of that period, while Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose represents eternal hope, that what could have been. And we need to learn, I think, from the lives of Mahatma Gandhi, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and Jawaharlal Nehru. And today we need to emphasize their similarities rather than their occasional differences.
So now we will come to the personal aspect. We have named this section I Saw Nehru. You are the one of the rare people who have seen Jawaharlal Nehru. Can you tell us about some of the personal qualities which you saw in the man?
Well, I saw Jawaharlal Nehru only once as a 5-year-old. It was on December 2nd, 1961, that Jawaharlal Nehru came to visit Netaji Bhavan, the Netaji Research Bureau had opened the Netaji Museum in this historic house on the 23rd of January 1961. And towards the end of that year, Jawaharlal Nehru came, and he spent a lot of time going through the museum. My father, Shishir Kumar Bose, showed him around. We have photographs even of my mother, Krishna Bose, at the entrance of the house receiving Nehru. And I apparently roamed about the entire museum at Jawaharlal Nehru's feet. And he was very good with children, as we all know, and he gently pushed me along as he went through the house and the museum. My mother has always told me that I was completely charmed by Jawaharlal Nehru. So it's hard for me to talk about the qualities of Nehru, but I can talk about the ways in which he interacted with my father, Shishir Kumar Bose. While he was Prime Minister, whenever my father went to Delhi, Nehru would often invite him over for breakfast. But on one occasion, my father told me that he was invited to meet Nehru as Prime Minister in Parliament House, because Parliament was in session at that time. And my father says that they talked about Subhash, and my father mentioned that Nehru was smoking quite a lot in those days. And Nehru said that I've heard that Subhash also used to smoke when he was the head of the Azad Hind government. And it was partly, I think, because of stress. And Nehru then said to my father, do you smoke? And my father replied, occasionally. And Nehru said, is this an occasion? And offered a cigarette. I've also heard from my father how wonderful a guest Nehru was in Sharat Chandra Bose's home at Woodburn Park. He used to say that Sharat Bose's dinners are a nuisance. They never end. There would be multiple courses and so on, and Nehru was very careful about his diet. And my father mentions that when he was a child or a young boy, he would often visit the room where Nehru would stay, and sometimes he would see Nehru doing the Shashan on his head. And then when he was offered Shandesh, the Bengali sweet, he would often take a knife, cut it in half, have half a Shandesh, and say to my father, will you have the other half? So those are the kinds of memories that my father had of Jawaharlal Nehru.
So that room itself is called Nehru room?
I had the good fortune of growing up in that room. Until the age of 18, I lived in Woodburn Park, and what was my room, children's room, on the ground floor of Woodburn Park was always referred to as Nehru's room, because Nehru stayed in that room as Sharat Bose's guest at One Woodburn Park. So I can't think of anything more wonderful to have that feeling that I sort of grew up as a child in a room that was referred to as Nehru's room. It was my mother who was a great admirer of Nehru's writings, and it was at her urging that as a schoolboy I read Nehru's autobiography. And my mother also remembers another visit by Nehru as Prime Minister, this time to the Institute of Child Health, the first children's hospital in Calcutta with which my father was associated. So, this is a relationship between two families that goes back a long way to the 1920s. It was especially close at the level of Jawaharlal Nehru and Sharat and Subhash Chandra Bose in the 1930s. But that relationship in many ways continued. And even when Nehru was Prime Minister, as I mentioned, my father would meet him in Delhi. He visited the Netaji Museum in December 1961. That was the only occasion on which I had an opportunity to see him in person. And I cherish that. I don't really have any memories as such, excepting what my parents told me about that encounter. But fortunately, there is a photograph of me at Nehru's feet as he is moving around the Netaji Museum.
Sir, we find that even Anita Bose visited to Jawaharlal Nehru.
That's right. When my aunt Anita came for the first time as an 18-year-old to India, she came to Calcutta, of course, first, but she went to Delhi and stayed with Nehru at the Prime Minister's house. So, yes, that is again another connection.
Sir, coming to the last question. On 27th May 1964, Jawaharlal Nehru passed away. You were around 10 years old at that time?
Less than that. I was born in 1956, so I was, not even 8 years old at that stage.
Do you remember anything of that?
Yes, because I think there was a pall of gloom that descended on our home, and both my parents were deeply moved. They felt that this was an end of an era. And my father in particular wrote a very beautiful obituary on Jawaharlal Nehru as the editor of the main pediatrics journal of that period, where he, highlighted Nehru's commitment to egalitarianism, but also his deep interest in international affairs.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving us time. I hope you liked this conversation.
It was very good to talk to you about two icons of our freedom struggle, and we need to learn from their books of life.
Thank you, sir.